the dark, lying on its side.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Repeal the 20th Century. Today I have a very special guest. I have Dr. Walter Block. Would you like to introduce yourself, Doctor?
I'm Walter Block. I'm a professor of economics at Loyola University and a long-time Austrian economist and libertarian.
Yep. And I wanted to have you on today, Dr. Walter Block, because at Mises University, you actually talked about that you're doing a third installment of the Defending the Undefendables series, and
Yes.
I think me and many others have found that series to be very interesting in its analysis of different, acts that are considered, reprehensible or evil by common society, but really under a libertarian framework are not. And I kind of wanted to ask you what undefendables really are left that you have not defended, that you want to get to.
Well, I am going to work on defending the Undefendable 4, and but I haven't got any candidates yet. I figure I'll come up with some. But what you said is not exactly true. What I'm defending is the legality of things,
Of course,
not necessarily that they're good or virtuous. We have to distinguish between a crime and a vice.
Mm-hmm.
Take prostitution. I don't favor prostitution. I don't go to prostitutes. I wouldn't want my wife, daughter, sister to be a prostitute. I think that that's not a good way to interact with people. The question is, for the libertarian, is should it be legal?
Mm-hmm.
Should people who do that between consenting adults go to jail? And I'm defending prostitution only in that latter sense, that no, they shouldn't go to jail because they don't violate the libertarian principle. So there are a lot of there are some things that are virtuous, and also you go to jail for, say, paying less than the minimum wage law. I think the minimum wage law is a rights violation. And if I offer you a job for $3 an hour, we'd both go to jail if I was serious. And I don't think that's a vice to offer someone $3 an hour. So I would defend anything that should be legal on the grounds that is legal. And some of the things are virtuous and some of the things are vices. But that is less important to the libertarian, because libertarianism is a theory of when can violence be properly utilized? Namely, in this case, when can something be against the law and you go to jail, or you're penalized by the government for it? So that's the main question that libertarians face.
All right. Do you think that, possibly that, some people argue that really the legality versus the morality question, though, they're not interchangeable, at least under the current society. That what is legal is what is moral, and vice versa, or at least in the framework of the current society we live under. So would you say that maybe it could be problematic if we were legalizing vices without actually achieving a society in where legality and morality are actually considered separate? Because a lot of people would argue they're really not, at least in the minds of most people.
Well, I agree. In the minds of most people, they're not. But most people are not libertarians, and we're libertarians. And our duty, I guess, if you want to put it that way, or our joy, is to explore what libertarianism means. And I think what it means is that there's a gigantic chasm between morality and legality. Just because something is immoral doesn't mean it should be against the law or not against the law. The two are very different. I mean, respecting your parents is moral. And if you don't respect your parents, you're immoral. Should you go to jail for not respecting your parents? Well, hardly. Or lying. I now tell you 2 + 2 is 5. It's a blatant lie on my part. I know 2 + 2 is 4. I engaged in immorality, I suppose. I told an untruth. I lied. Should I go to jail for that? Well, not unless you hired me to be your math tutor. I'm misleading you, in which case I'm guilty of fraud. But apart from that, I don't think violence should be used against me for saying that 2 + 2 is 5.
Hmm. So I wanted to ask about specific undefendables, as you know the term is, because I think a lot of the undefendable mindset is coming up. A lot of people get called undefendables. A very close word would be deplorable that has been used in politics a lot. But I wanted to ask specifically because it's the hot button issue about anti-vaxxers, people who refuse to take the vaccine. What's your view on this? Is it a immorality that should be legal, or are they not in this category of undefendables that you would defend?
Well, I really don't. I've written 3 books now. Each one has got 30 or 40 chapters, and I don't remember offhand what I've got in there. But
Hmm.
I certainly do remember my views on vaccinations.
Hmm.
I recently wrote an article in the Journal of Libertarian Studies on this, and I am taking a view that most people don't take. Most libertarians do not take. Now, the way I see libertarianism or libertarians, they're either hawks or doves. The hawks are the ones that say you got to take the vaccination. You don't take the vaccination, we're gonna, you're gonna lose your job, and maybe you should go to jail for not taking the vaccination because if you don't take it, you're like Typhoid Mary, and you're spreading disease.
Hmm.
And libertarians are against that. Typhoid Mary. Well, she wasn't. She had no mens rea. She didn't realize that she was infected, but she was infecting people with typhoid, which is a dread disease, and we were entitled to lock her up, not in a jail, but in house arrest, or keep her comfortable and happy, but we couldn't let her out into the public. So those are the hawks. Then there are the doves that say this is all BS, this is nonsense. The government hasn't proved squat, and therefore, the anti-vaxxers are correct, and nobody should pay a penalty for not getting the jab, and you shouldn't lose your job if you don't get the jab. My own view is agnostic. In religion, you're either an atheist or a theist or an agnostic. Uh, a theist believes in God, an atheist says there is no God, and agnostic says I don't know,
Hmm.
which is sort of a cop out, but I'm willing to cop out in vaccinations. Why do I want to cop out? Because I'm an economist. What do I know about epidemiology? I'm not a medical doctor. I have a doctorate, but it's in economics. I don't know. I believe in specialization and division of labor. And in physics, they're having an argument as to whether matter is like a wave or a particle, and in astronomy, they're having a debate over is Pluto a planet. I don't have any views on those things either. I'm an agnostic on those views, and I think that anyone who says qua libertarian that Pluto is a planet or Pluto isn't a planet, or that matter is made of whatever a wave or a particle or whatever, they're exceeding what libertarianism has to say.
Hmm.
So my view is that we qua libertarians don't know. We don't know just how contagious it is and how dangerous it is. Maybe we know a little bit more in the last year and a half, but we still don't know. And then there's this Omicron virus. So I'm neither a hawk nor a dove. I'm against atheism and theism. I'm an agnostic on this question. And I think that's the proper libertarian view.
Hmm. So would you characterize that as being, neutral on any like COVID policies? Like would you say you're not against a vaccine mandate, but you're also not for it?
Well, the burden of proof is on he who wants to use violence against other people.
Hmm.
If you want to put Typhoid Mary into a house arrest, the burden of proof is on you, not her. It's on you. Has the government met its burden of proof? No, government has not met any sense of burden of proof. They keep talking about the science, but one of the essences of science is open inquiry. And what the government is doing with doctors who disagree with the mainstream view, they threaten to take their medical license away. What about epidemiologists who disagree? They threatened to cancel them or to get them fired. So I think philosophically I'm an agnostic, but when it comes time when the rubber meets the road, if you have to make one choice or the other, I would be a dove. I would say that the government has not met anything near its burden of proof, and therefore it has no right to compel anyone to do anything.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting view, because I think a lot of people feel as if they have to be on one side or the other with it, especially as libertarians. I know Stephen Kinsella, who I'm sure you're aware of. He gets into a lot of arguments about this because he's not against the vaccine. He's taken the vaccine, but many libertarians will shame you for getting the vaccine, saying you're falling into the government's ploy, and I think it's interesting that you are in this position of, you know, it's not necessarily good or bad. It comes down to really, do they meet this burden of proof, which I don't think a lot of libertarians are really considering as a thing. They're really just looking at the implications overall and then moving that down philosophically, which actually does kind of bring me to another point about a recent argument that got really, really big among libertarians online right now is a disagreement over uh, the use of police now. Um, Not really saying, okay, well, in Ancapistan or in an anarcho-capitalist world or libertarian world, the police would ideally be privatized. There would be no public property. But how do we approach public property now? We have parks. It was the example. Parks that, homeless people will encamp in. They will do drugs and even sometimes have sex in them. And these are places where we would ideally like to take our children. We don't really have that much in the way of alternatives. And people said, people on one side said, well, the cops exist. There are only current force of enforcement on public property. So have the cops remove them. And um, other libertarians got very upset. How could you want to use cops? How could you be a libertarian and use cops? I kind of wanted to get your view on this. Are we allowed to use? Are we allowed to endorse state-used violence on public property if it is to enforce the current law, or do we have to oppose it everywhere we see it?
Well, this is a very good, challenging point. And before I answer it, I just wanted to say that libertarians are divided on other issues
Mm-hmm.
beside this one and beside the COVID. We're also divided on abortion. Ron Paul is pro-life. Murray Rothbard is pro-choice. They're two leaders, and yet they're 180 degrees apart. On immigration, Hans Hoppe and Murray Rothbard are not for open borders, and then there are many libertarians who are for open borders. So it should occasion no surprise that here too libertarians are divided. We live in a complex world, and we libertarians are trying to do our best. But with the best will in the world, we're not smart enough to see God's eye view. We have to just do the best we can with our limited intellectual capacities. Okay, so now let me try to address the question of should you employ the police to stop bums from hanging out in Central Park in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like that question because it's really two questions, and I like to handle one at a time. So let me first just talk about police in general and forget about the park issue, and then we'll talk about the park and then try to put the two together. Okay, so what's with the police? Well, sometimes the police do very bad things. They put people in jail for victimless crimes, pornography, prostitution, drugs, whatever. On the other hand, sometimes the police do good things. They stop murder, they stop rape, or they arrest the rapist, or they arrest the murderer. The only problem with that is we still don't like the way their jobs are financed. But if you look at it in isolation, if you put the horses, what do you call it, blinders on, and you just see a cop arresting somebody for rape, that's a virtuous act. So what we have to say is, I think, with regard to public police, that they do some good things and they do some bad things. And so we're ambivalent. We favor the good things and we oppose the bad things. And we certainly oppose how they're paid based on taxes, which are compulsory. So much for the police. What about the parks? Should the bums, it used to be bums, now they're no longer bums, they're homeless people. But whatever, should they be allowed to go into the park? Well, I disagree with Murray Rothbard on liberating library books from public libraries. Murray said you shouldn't be able to do it, or you shouldn't allow the bum in the library who's going to smell it up and make it impossible for anyone to go in there. And I'm saying, well, I guess I disagree with Murray on this one. I think that we shouldn't have public libraries or public parks, and anything that screws them up has got to be to the good. So we should allow the bums or the homeless people into the parks, and if the people with children who want their children to play there without homeless people interfering with them, well, then they should rise up and stop the public libraries and stop the public parks. So I would, in this case, now let's put the two together, I would be on the side of opposing the police from kicking the bum out of the library or the bum out of the park. Mm-hmm. Not because I think that it's good. I mean, I'm against bums. I'm against homeless people. I think that the main reason we have homeless people is they shut down the mental institutions, and a lot of them are mentally troubled. And then also you have rent control and zoning and all sorts of government policies that make it difficult to have housing. And if we had double the amount of housing, we'd have many fewer of them. But still, I think that we should not unleash the police to stop them. Mm-hmm. What we should do is privatize the thing, and then in those cases, the whole bum problem disappears. You get a private library or a private park. Disney World is a private park, and if there's a bum in there, they kick the bum out, mm-hmm. and then people can go to private parks. So what would happen if the public parks were no longer available because they were bummed out or bummed up or whatever the word is? Well, then private people would open up private parks, and kids could go there safely.
Mm-hmm. So a counter argument that the side who would like to, use the police to remove bums, as it is, from public parks, to remove them off of public property in general, really, is that it's twofold. The first one is being that, well, the argument of just going to a private park or privatizing the park is not really, realistic in the sense that it can't just happen overnight. There is this problem here and now, and it causes many, many problems. Usually the homeless will engage in aggravated assault. Sometimes they are engaged in public nudity. They engage in all these acts that we wouldn't want children to be around or have happen to them. And there's not really anything else we can do but use the police to just flat out remove them and say, well, they go wherever they go. And then the other argument is, for example, if they're hanging out in front of a storefront. I don't know if you've ever been to New York City, but you'll see this a lot. There'll be homeless people who, sit out storefronts, and that, while technically the sidewalk is not their private property, it's encroaching on their private property by sort of blocking it, making it less desirable to go into that private property, and etc. So that's kind of their argument. Well, how would you respond to that? Would you say, oh, that kind of changes the situation, or is there some other explanation there that you would say?
Well, I think the key element there is a matter of timing. What you're saying is we can't solve this in the next 5 minutes. So what are we going to do?
Hmm.
But these problems have been with us for decades, right? So it's not a matter of timing. I mean, we've always had bums, homeless people floating around. One way to solve it from a pragmatic point of view is to open up the mental hospitals. I think due to Thomas Oz, the mental institutions have been opened up, and all the mentally handicapped people have been let out on the street. So that would be one solution. Another solution is the government should stop all of its anti-housing policies. And it's got many, the zoning and rent
Hmm.
control and unions and all sorts of other things. So if the government was really concerned about this, that they would stop their policies that interfere with housing, and we'd have double, triple the amount of housing, and then the problem wouldn't go away, but it would be a lot less serious. So if you want to be pragmatic about it, I think that's one way to go. Another way to go is, uh, you know, people will then, if the problem of libraries and museums and parks becomes so bad, entrepreneurs, it doesn't take entrepreneurs very long to open up, to knock down a few houses, maybe a whole city block full of old houses, buy them up and knock them all down and put in a park and charge money. I mean, we do have Disney World and Five Flags, or I forget the other parks. There are private parks out there, and there are certainly private libraries and private museums, and the whole problem would go away. But we libertarians have to put privatization front and center. My motto here is that if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything. Well, how are we going to get toward privatization? One way to get toward privatization is to allow public property and public spaces to be seen with all of their flaws. And we don't want to stop the flaws. I mean, I'm not in favor of telling bums to come to the park and make it rough for kiddies. But if they're there, to move them out is problematic.
Hmm. So would you say that really, um, it's not just about not moving the bums out of the park isn't just about the principled, well, let's not use police against non-violent people, but also there is the pragmatic level that actually leaving them there makes public property less desirable and leads to our goals.
Yeah, yeah, I would say that's true. I mean, if you want to promote liberty, that's privatization. And you have to ask, well, is this a move toward or away from privatization?
Hmm.
And I think getting the police to stop them is a move away from privatization. It's similar. The Marxists really are against labor unions,
Mm-hmm.
and they're against welfare. They think that, I mean, in their heart of hearts, they favor this because it'll help the poor in their view. Although our view on unions and welfare is that it hurts the poor, but that's a different issue. They think it helps the poor, but they're still against it because they think that it buttresses the capitalist system, and they want to have a revolution. Well, we're all Marxists now. Don't repeat that out of context, or I'll get in trouble. But in this sense, I think we can borrow a leaf from the Marxists. We want to be radical too. And one way to be radical is to, look at public property as theft.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting view, and those are things that I didn't really consider, even though, like I have that background knowledge, because I've heard a lot of from my own readings of Marxist literature about how, they did not favor labor unions, they did not favor welfare because it made conditions somewhat better under capitalism and made it harder for the revolution per se. Um, so would you say that in not just this situation, but really all of the situations that apply to libertarian principles, you would say letting it get worse would, lead eventually lead to our positions really being adopted because they would show the alternative is really better?
Well, I'm trying to draw a thin line here, or stay on the tightrope. I'm not saying that we should encourage
Hmm.
bums to come.
Sure, for sure.
It's interesting. At some university whose name I won't mention, what happened was that the students went down to very rich areas and made sandwiches for bums.
Hmm.
And the very rich people in the rich neighborhood didn't much like it. You know what they did? They started making sandwiches right near that university and inviting the bums to the university. And the university didn't much like that. Even the students didn't much like it. In other words, it's okay for them to push bums on other people, but not onto themselves. So they're a little hypocritical here. And I think we have to try to avoid hypocrisy.
Mm. So I guess the best way to characterize it would be a sort of ambivalence to it. Um, not support it but not oppose it, which I think also is kind of the position originally that a lot of people on the side of get rid of the bums was actually that they were trying to be ambivalent to the use of police, like because they saw the not having bums in parks as a good thing, because you don't want children around people who are shooting up drugs or engage in public nudity or public sex, um, and so they were ambivalent to the use of police against them. But but you're saying that it is probably better for our ends to be ambivalent towards the bums being there in the first place, and oppose the use of police force.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm an agnostic all over the place. It's interesting you mentioned public sex. There's another debate that I got into, I think, with Hans Hoppe, and that was the front lawn fornicator.
Mm-hmm.
Forget about parks; everything is private. And this couple, they like to fornicate on their front lawn, and there's a private road, and it's a nice development, and the kids and the horses are scared, and the question is, well, how do you stop that? And what Hans is saying is that you have to, that I think it was Hans, I'm not sure. There was somebody that I got into a debate over this, and they were saying, well, you need more than a non-aggression principle,
Mm-hmm.
because having sex on your front lawn is not per se a violation of a rights violation, and yet we don't want it. And libertarianism with its non-aggression principle will not get it for us. And my side of that argument was, well, libertarianism will get it for us. Namely, what we'll have is a condominium development or a gated community or a homeowners association. And when you buy a house in this development, you have to agree to be bound by the rules. And in most condo associations, the rule will be no fornication on the front lawn. Uh, and also we're going to have annual meetings or monthly meetings or whatever, because somebody will say, well, I'll masturbate on the front lawn, which is just as bad, but we didn't think to prohibit that. Well, then we'll change the rules. So no rule can anticipate every weird thing. So
Mm-hmm.
you need a continual meeting, once a year or twice a year or something like that. And then there could be other condominium associations where front lawn fornication is required, right? Everyone has to do it at least once a week, otherwise you get kicked out of the condo association. So you could have people who wanted those things, and then people would separate themselves out based on whether they're straight or I don't know what the word is, heavily sexed or whatever the word is, where you're required to engage in front lawn fornication. But I think private property rights are the solution to this and many, many other problems. And the reason we have these problems is because we don't have private property rights. And then critics of libertarianism say, well, what should you do about the police stopping homeless people from getting into parks and making it impossible for little children to thrive there? And one answer to that is, look, that's not our problem. We have a solution. Privatize the goddamn park, and then there's no more problem. And stop hocking us with these problems that are really your problems. We don't have another way to answer this question is say we don't have to answer it, or we do have an answer. Privatize the park, And don't tell me, well, what should we do now? Because right now it's not a libertarian society, and we're just defending libertarian societies. We're not defending uh, um, what's the word, mixed economies
Mm-hmm.
or mixed societies where you have some public and some private. We're not defending that, and it does create problems, and these problems are really insoluble, and I guess I'm trying to wrestle with them, and but I'm not really happy with all of my answers, because you can always say, well, what about the poor kids, and our heart goes out to the poor little kids that can't go play in the playground, and I guess a better answer would be, it's not our problem, shut up. We have an answer, privatize it. You don't like it, too bad.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's interesting because what I've seen from witnessing this debate as it's been going on is that most of the people who do oppose the use of cops against bums in the public parks, they're not really operating in this way where you're saying, well, it's not our problem because we gave you the solution, and it's either do that or we're not going to be on your side. Um, but the people who are defending it right now, a lot of them, I see them going, well, it's just you can't use violence against them. You can't use violence against them. And even going as far as to say, like, well, violence shouldn't be used against them at all if even if it was a private park. And I find it weird that they continue to operate in the current trying to look for the current functions of the society, rather than say, well, we have the solution for it, like you're saying, and if they don't, well, you're going to see the consequences of your actions, and see how bad it really just gets. And I think
Well, look, there are some people who are pacifists and don't believe in the use of violence, even defensive violence. But libertarians, and there are some libertarians who are pacifists. And the usual answer to them is, suppose I'm hitting your kid, are you going to stop me or not? And that wouldn't be an embarrassment for them. But libertarianism is not necessarily pacifistic.
mhm,
We just oppose the initiation of violence, not the defensive use of violence against the initiation of violence.
mhm,
So if we had a private park and somebody came and we didn't like them, we should be able to kick them out. A lot of stores have the sign, no shirt, no shoes, no service.
mhm.
They're perfectly entitled to do that. And if you don't have shoes and you don't have shirt, go somewhere else. Don't come into McDonald's or whatever the restaurant has. And what we could say is that if you're a smelly bum and you're engaging in all sorts of things that would perturb little kids and their parents, don't come to this park.
Okay. I kind of have. I think this would be the last kind of question, because I think it gets down to property ownership, and another debate that I think comes from this debate and has been debated a lot in libertarian circles, and it's really just who owns public property, who gets the right to set standards for them. Does anyone get the right to set standards as long as it exists, or do we have to just open it up to everybody under the libertarian framework, at least moral framework, that is?
Well, when the Soviet Union went kaput, there was a question, well, who gets to own the farms and the factories and the buildings and the office towers and stuff like that? And if we had a God's eye view where God knows everything, we would just say, well, this guy spent so much money on taxes, he gets so much acreage of the farm or the forest, and this guy was taxed that amount and he gets so much, and that would be the end of the story. Another way to do it is the farms, the collectivized farms belong to the farmers because they mix their labor with them, and the factories belong to the factory workers, and that's that's not so bad. There was this case in British Columbia, Canada, where there was this company called BCRIC, Brick British Columbia Resource Investment Corporation. Well, when the NDP, the socialist government, was in there was a Crown Corporation, which is sort of like, I don't know, utility or a government bureau. And they owned forests and lumber mills and all sorts of stuff. And then a vaguely free enterprise, what do you call it, government came in and they wanted to privatize it. And what they did is they made a new corporation, Brick Corporation, and they gave 5 shares to every British Columbian. Well, that's not exactly right because some paid more taxes than others, but what the heck? You have to give them at least a B plus for effort in privatizing. So I think that would be the way you go. I've got a book on we should have private roads and private rivers and private lakes. Well, how do you decide who gets to own the Mississippi River? The people who used it, the people who have those boats going up and down the Mississippi River, the people who have land on the side of the Mississippi River, because we assume that they used it a little bit more than everyone else. The same with the highways. Who owns the highways? Well, I live in New Orleans, and the I-10 goes right past us. It goes from Florida out to California. Who should own it? Well, we divide it up by everyone who's used it, and now we have, I don't know, 20 million people each with a share, and together they own the private I-10 corporation. That would be how you would privatize it. It would be rough and ready because we lack God's eye view. We don't know exactly who paid what taxes and whose land went there during eminent domain. If we know that, then we should use that. But in the absence of anything, the key is to get it into private hands. And the brick thing was a step in the right direction. And so was the Soviet Union getting rid of collectivized farms and factories.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I would kind of just ask a follow up, because I know you said not really operating in, we're not libertarian, but like, would your view be then that with public property that exists now, the government has no right to like enforce standards on the public property that exists?
Well, according to Lysander Spooner and Murray Rothbard, the government is just a robber gang. They have no rights to do anything. The only thing that they have a right to do is to disband. So they shouldn't be setting up anything. We should privatize it, and the private people would make the rules, hopefully on a libertarian basis.
All right. Yeah, I think that's an interesting view, and I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything you want to promote for my audience?
Well, we were supposed to talk about defending the undefendable 3.
Yeah.
We never really got to it. All I can say is that there are now 3 volumes of it with different characters in each of the books.
Mm-hmm.
And Defending the Undefendable 1 came out in 1976, and the second one, I think, in 2009. And this one just came out in this year, 2021. So if you're interested in this, get all 3.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to leave a link down below on where they can get it from the Mises bookstore. I really do suggest it. I own Defending the Undefendables 1 and have read a little bit of Defending the Undefendables 2. But yeah, I can't wait to get to Defending the Undefendables 3. And I appreciate you coming on. I think we had some really interesting conversations. And yeah, have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.